Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. This is the Chris Reeve Knives Impinda. First off, though, I want to thank very much my Patreon patrons who make it possible for me to see a brand new $450 knife and go, yeah, I should pick one of those guys up for the channel for review. Not only do they make the whole thing possible, but that's a wonderful thing, and they are gems, each and every last one of them, so that's great. Next thing, let's do a size comparison right quick. This is actually sort of a knife that's bigger than I expected. Here it is against the Ontario Rat number 2 and your Spyderco Delica. So what we can see here is that in terms of sharpened blade length, markedly longer than Delica, even though the handle size is actually relatively compact, which is kind of good, right? And here it is against the Spyderco PM2. And so what we can see here is, again, not a tiny knife, but also not huge. Then actually two other relevant size comparisons right here within the Chris Reeve Knives brand. First one is the small Shabazz 21. So we can see in terms of blade, we're actually very, very similar in terms of sharpened blade length to the 21 here. And also the handle is a little bit bigger than the 21, although it's relatively similar. And then here it is against the Chris Reeve Knives Mundi, which is sort of the logical point of comparison here. And we can see that this guy is markedly larger than the Mundi, both in terms of overall blade length and in terms of overall size. So there are your relevant size comparisons for the Impinda here. Next thing, this guy is a Bill Harsey design. Bill Harsey is not a employee of Chris Reeve Knives, but he designed this one for him. At least I don't think he's an employee. I don't freaking know. Anyways, he is the designer of this particular pocket knife. So this is not a Chris Reeve design, but nevertheless. And then finally, just a quick note. This is a knife that a bunch of people have been asking about. It's been out for a while. It was sort of announced, I want to say, maybe at SHOT Show 2019, even longer. But they were only recently sort of coming into regular availability. So anyways, here we go. Let's go on ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this interesting pocket knife here. So on the good side, to start with, the clip on this guy is removable. You can take this guy off and very easily either swap in a small Shabazz clip, takes exactly the same clip as the small Shabazz, or you can just take it off altogether and carry this guy in a leather slip, which I think might be something that a lot of people end up choosing to do with something like this. So it's nice that it's both removable and that it's a standard size, at least for Chris Reeve. So that's good. It'll also fit any other aftermarket small Shabazz style pocket clips, and so that's great. Next thing, fit and finish on this guy is predictably good. It's a Chris Reeve knife, and so you'd expect fit and finish to be pretty decent, but it really is. Everything that's supposed to be chamfered is chamfered. In terms of precision, we're looking at pretty solid work here. That's a nice thing. Next thing, this is a fine little blade on this guy. It is their conventional S35 VN steel, and it actually comes down to a very thin edge. I mean, it is, I would say, a little bit thinner behind the edge than the small Shabazz is. I like seeing the grind on this guy done pretty well. It's not the thinnest thing absolutely ever, but by Chris Reeve standards, this is quite thin at the edge. And so, in terms of cutting, this is actually quite nice, and so I appreciate that very much. Next thing, they are trying something new here, which, at some level I do appreciate. Chris Reeve is a company that for a long time is sort of this Shabazz company, and so having them try out a whole different locking mechanism is something that's interesting. And I always tend to support makers trying to do things that are a little new and different and step out of their lane a little bit. And then finally, one of the details I like about this guy a lot is the fact that the washers are recessed. As you saw during my disassembly video, the washers on this knife are actually recessed down into little pockets there. And what this allows is this right here. There are relatively little gaps, there is relatively little gap right here between the edges of the blade and the sides of the handle. What was the knife I just had that was doing this? Oh, it was around here someplace, but I don't... Anyways, there are lots of knives out there that are sort of that modern-y, traditional sort of approach, but where you have those big old gaps off to the side. I wonder if the Mundi does. Yeah, the Mundi has much more of that gapping on the side of the blade there where the washers fit in. Yeah, that'll work. Whereas this guy doesn't, and that's because those washers have been recessed, basically milled into a little, or put into a little pocket there, which makes them fit in there just beautifully. And so as a result, you get something that looks a lot more like a conventional slip joint, even though there is actually even though there are actually phosphor bronze washers. And so to me at least, that's a really nice little detail, and it's a sign that they're giving a crap. thinking carefully about this knife. So at least to me, all that is the good, is that they've got this detail of keeping the washers recessed in there so that you get relatively little gap there. You have them trying something new. The blade on this guy is fine with S35VN and a thin grind. Fit and finish on it is good, and the clip is removable and a standard Shabazz pattern. On the great side to me is the disassembly. This guy takes apart entirely with just one kind of wrench here. I was using a 2mm... oh, come on. Where's the thing? Yeah, 2mm, just standard hex key sort of affair. And they actually include that along with the grease that you need to use for it. But it is actually very easy to take apart. It's using standard bits. It's got nice big washers in there. They are recessed. One thing to note is that this knife is super lube sensitive. This kind of, at least I haven't found another lube that works when the Chris Reeve, their grease seems to work best here. So, but that said, a lot of slip joints tend to be very, very difficult to get back together, particularly if they've got very strong springs. And so I appreciate the fact that this is a slip joint, but it is absolutely easy to take apart and put back together, fully break down in service. That is definitely something I appreciate, and it's something I appreciate from Chris Reeve Knives in general. They are a company that puts a lot of premium on easy disassembly, and the fact that it is the case here as well, that's a beautiful thing. So to me, at least, that's what's great here. On the bad side, unfortunately, there's a fair bit here. To start with, this is not really a failing of the knife itself, but it's just the nature of the beast. This is a two-hand open, two-hand closed sort of knife. You definitely are going to need two hands to get this open, and in practice, you kind of can get it closed with one hand, I guess, but for the most part, this is just a two-hand knife, generally speaking. There is no way to open this one-handed. I mean, it's not going to work with this, but yeah. So that's something to keep in mind. Next thing on this guy, unfortunately, they have made the choice to make this blade over 3 inches, which to me is actually a really crazy thing, because the biggest market for this knife, and at least the one that I can think of, and I think the one that would be very grateful to see it, would actually be the UK. And there, 3 inches is the magical line. So why their very first slip joint was made at a size that's going to be illegal to a market that, you know, desperately has probably wanted a Chris Reeve, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And so, to me, going at 3.25 inches makes very little sense relative to going smaller than that. I don't necessarily get it. Next thing, this is a slip joint knife. And as a result, tradition tends to dictate that slip joints have relatively thin blade stock. Unfortunately, this doesn't. This has relatively thick stock, at least for a traditional knife. And so I feel like I wish that they had gone with that classical version of the slip joint with the real thin stock on there, just to make this an absolute cutting beast, because that would have made it stand out a little bit more in the market. But instead, no, they're using what appears to be the same stock as the small Shabazz, and I don't quite get that. Next thing, this guy is, and this is very subjective. You're welcome to sting me for this. You're welcome to disagree entirely. But to me, at least, this is very boring looking. There's really no, I mean, I guess there's a design here, but it really, there's not a whole lot to it. It doesn't have anything really in common with the rest of the Shabazz or Inkosi or any of the line. It doesn't feel like it's related to any other Chris Reeve. I mean, it's by a different designer, obviously, but still, it doesn't feel like it has anything in common with the rest of their lineup, and honestly, it feels a little bit like a titanium mass. There aren't super strong lines here. I mean, I guess you got the top line there, but I don't get the design particularly. And in a company that has a very cohesive design aesthetic, a company that has a lot of things that are similar, this just feels like sort of a, oh yeah, and we also make this. And so I don't necessarily get it. And it's not in a particularly stylish way, like the tie lock or something along those lines. It is unfortunately just a titanium mess, and that's not something that brings me a lot of joy. But then again, this could be bias. Next thing, this is very lube sensitive. I put this together using the same, lubrication that I use on my small Shabazz. It was awful. This thing bound up at every step. It was just an absolute And so you really, at least in my experience here, and given I haven't tried every lube option on the market with it, but you really do need to use the Chris Reeve lube. That's what it's designed for. They ship it with it, so I can't really argue too much. But the difference between a completely unacceptable action and an action that's, what it is, it's the choice of lube there. So as soon as you run out of that, you're ordering some more from them. Next thing, the action on this guy. guy is just not great, generally speaking. What I will say is that this went from ugly to bad during the course of the review. I mean, to start with, changing the lubrication, moving back to the factory lube, and by the way, it didn't come to me lubricated, which was interesting. But anyways, moving to the factory lubrication made a big difference here, but more importantly, wearing it in. Just sitting on the couch and doing this over and over again, just wearing it in that way made the action a lot better. It got better, it got a little smoother, etc. I ended up finding one at a local store to compare against, and, unfortunately, this is about where that one is, too, because that one's been handled a lot, too. What I will say about this action 100% is that slip joint people, this is not what you are used to. Most of the time on a slip joint, you get a very strong half stop and a very strong full stop, where there's really a strong spring engagement at two different stages here. Whereas this is very slow. It's very spongy in a lot of ways. You can definitely pop it open. You can pop it open relatively smoothly. Honestly, the half stop is not a half stop at all. It is like a half slow. It's like it gets a little more, there's a little more resistance to closing it at this point. And, generally speaking, I guess it would probably try and stop itself someplace in this realm over here. But it's sort of a half slow. And honestly, the half stop is more relevant. The half stop is more of a stop on opening than it is on closing, which is kind of exactly backwards. Basically, I'm not very impressed with the action. I am not a traditional slip jointy sort of guy. But at the same time, I can see there being an element of joy in having a strong half stop on something because it can be a bit of a safety measure, right? Instead, this guy ends up feeling a lot more like some of the other modern slip joints coming out of companies that don't historically do slip joints, like the Hinderer Slippy, the XM18 slip joint, the Benchmade Proper, etc. This feels a lot more like that than it does an actual old school slip joint, and that's honestly to me not something I'm a big fan of there. There are so many great slip joints out there that I kind of wish they had taken a different tack. Now, mind you, they say very explicitly that they're trying to do a new thing with the action here. They're not trying to be a classical slip joint. Trying to make it very smooth to open and smooth to close, and given it is smooth to open and it is smooth to close, ish, kind of. I mean, it's not Shabazz smooth, we'll put it that way, but it's smooth-ish to open and close. But at the same time, I don't know that that's a really compelling goal. I sort of prefer the safety of the classical half stop in there, rather than this, we'll slow you down a little bit, sort of an approach. So I don't particularly care for the action, and I think if you are a traditional slip joint sort of person, this is probably not what you're looking for there. Then next thing, speaking of the action, well, not of the action so much as just the lockup here, or lack thereof. One of the things I tend to like on a slip joint, especially one where there's a relatively weak half stop, is for there to be some kind of an unsharpened area down at the bottom here that would allow me to kind of rest my finger here, and if the knife starts to close, you get basically it stops. The knife, the blade stops, and the unsharpened part hits your finger. And especially when you've got a slip joint that has a relatively light spring on this guy, that's not something I'm particularly in love with. The fact is, if this guy starts to close, it'll close directly onto your finger right up out here, and you will get yourself cut. Because again, the half stop can't necessarily be trusted to be there. Or at least it's there, but it's just going to slow things down. Mind you, I didn't do stupid cutting tests. I didn't, jab this guy into a car door and then move up in that direction. I mean, that I didn't do that, but it just doesn't feel super strong. Mind you, if you're holding this guy in a classical saber grip, then there is actually a fair amount. You can apply some pressure to close the lock bar here, and that actually keeps it, it makes it a little bit harder for this guy to accidentally close, but still. I do wish that there was some unsharpened area here that would make this just a little bit, give you a little bit bigger margin of safety. Given a lot of slip joints don't have that, but not a big fan of that. Then finally, on the bad side, the clip on this guy is just bad. Unfortunately, I don't know. Many people argue that the Shabazz clip is the very best clip in the business because although it's not the fanciest one, it's not a big fancy milled titanium thing, it does one thing exceptionally well, and that's keep the damn clip in keep the knife in the pants, right? That's what a clip is supposed to do. And this is an exceptionally good clip. It is more or less an optimal solution to that problem. Unfortunately, they chose not to put the Shabazz clip on here, and they put this milled thing on there. And this milled thing is okay, I guess, but the thing is, if we look at it there closely, what we can see is that it only really touches in one point, so that makes it a little bit of a pants eater, which is not something I'm in love with. Yeah, see right there. That's not great. And more importantly, it doesn't have all that much flex to it, and so this is just a knife that sucks to get in and out of the pocket there. I ended up changing this guy out to the Shabazz clip, which, by the way, is a possibility, and you can do it for like $15 on there for the time I was carrying it because, well, that just made it so much nicer to carry. But at the same time, you shouldn't need to swap the clip on a $450 knife, and the fact that they went fancy but ended up compromising the I don't know, the usefulness of the clip, that kind of bugs me a little bit. And considering that this clip isn't like, oh my God, you know, the most beautiful thing on the face of the earth, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of this clip at all. And the fact that this comes from the company that has the best clip in the business, so to speak, it stings a little bit. So, at least to me, all of that is the bad here, is that the clip on it is not very good. There's no unsharpened area at the base for safety, which is something you'd want when you have a very weak half stop on this guy. The action on this is just not very good. It's not the smoothest thing ever, and it also just, it's uncompelling. It's like, it's not a half stop. Anyways, I digress. It's very sensitive to using the proper lube. It's pretty boring looking. It's got relatively thick stock. It's just over a 3-inch line, and it's two hand open and two hand closed, but again, that's the nature of the beast with a slip joint. On the ugly front, the only ugly thing here is the price point for me. Look, it's made in the USA. It's a beautiful thing. I'm willing to give you that 100% of the day. And you know what? Chris Reeve Knives, at least historically, has had very, very good, and, you know, has had very, very good fit and finish, those kinds of things. So I can see I can see some premium here, and they've got a good warranty, so, but $450 is the price on this. That makes this knife more expensive than a bare bones Shabazz, although this one has the Doppler pattern. It makes it more expensive than the Menundi, with a wood inlay and everything like that. How this knife is more expensive than either of these two is absolutely magic to me, because in both of these cases, there's an actual lock to it. You know, and this is a carbon fiber one. You can get them on wood. But I truly and deeply do not get it. This feels like it should be their entry levelist of entry level knife. This feels like, you know, they're okay, you know, let's get them hooked, sort of thing, rather than being firmly in the middle of the pack. I mean, $450 for this, I don't see it. I really don't. And it seems completely out of line relative to the rest of their line, because they have so many really good knives and that are in that domain, and then they want the same amount of money for this. I just don't freaking see it. And so to me, at least, what's ugly here is the price. I don't see that price as being I just don't see it. And especially when they've got everything else priced as they do, I don't get it. But actually, that brings us to our final conclusion, which is that I don't get it. I'm going to be honest here. I mean, I kind of get what they're going for. They're jumping into the modern slip joint thing. And you know what? I'm all in favor of the modern slip joint, Buzz. I think there's a lot that we can learn in the modern knife world from traditional knives. I think there's a lot to be said for that kind of thing. And they're doing it with a good steel, with a nice blade grind, good fit and finish, ergos, and easy disassembly, which is one of the very best things that this thing brings to the table. It's a reminder that a good knife, period, can be easily serviced at home, and making a slip joint in that way, yeah, that's a beautiful thing. And so I love very, very much that they've gone there, and that's what's bringing me joy here, if anything. But the thing is, it seems to kind of stray away from this modern slip joint ideal, because it's over the length line for their biggest potential market, well, at least outside of that their current knives don't get to, and that's, you know, the UK, that kind of the European world. It's super thick stock for a slip joint. It's kind of boring. It doesn't seem to fit with any of the rest of their stuff out there. The action on it is not great. The clip is bad from a company that's known for good clips. And then it's $450 somehow. But honestly, I think the thing that bugs me most, and this could be bias, you're welcome to read it in this way, but you know, the saying is that suffering is the gap between expectation and reality. Chris Reeve Knives is the company that makes some of the, you know, very best dressy knives on the market, right? I mean, the small Shabazz itself, you know, especially when you start throwing in those nice inlays, this is an amazing kind of dressy or classically gentle person's knife. It's a great choice there. And the Menundi, similarly, is just like, if anybody says to me, hey, Nick, I need a really classy knife to go in my suit, Menundi, like Nundi, 100%. That's where I go first. If they can afford it, this is your choice. And so when I first heard, when it first dropped, I heard rumors like, oh, wow, Chris Reeve did a slip joint. I was thinking, wow, great. It'll be like the Menundi, but it'll be legal in more places and maybe a little bit more traditional. That's going to be awesome. And then I saw this guy. It's fine. It's something they can make, but it leaves behind all the joys of slip jointitude. I mean, this is a modern traditional knife, but with none of the joys of the tradition. It's using thick stock. It's got an action that's not, Well, let's put it this way. There's a reason a lot of slip joints have the action that they do. It's a good functional idea. The materials are entirely new fashioned, but not in the way that you want. You know, plain blasted titanium. That's pretty modern, but I don't know that that's what we need here. And honestly, it's a completely non-dressy knife when slip joints, I think in most modern contexts, are considered to be a little bit of a higher-end, dressy, classy sort of thing. You know, honestly, this is a knife that if you just look at it on the face of it, looks like it belongs on a job site or something. This looks like a serious, you know, this is a tool. In the same way that, you know, the Shabazz literally means worker. In Zulu, this is designed to be a working tool, and at some level, this looks like it is too. Maybe that's the commonality between those two designs. But the thing is, that's not really where a slip joint is best suited, at least in my estimation. If somebody says, I need a knife to put in good work on the job site, I'm not going to tell them to go to get a slip joint. Unless they have some legal entanglement that prevents them from a safer tool, I really don't think that's the right choice. And so you have something that looks like it belongs on a job site someplace, but costs more than their other options and isn't really slip jointy at all. So ultimately, I had hoped very, very much that a slip joint from Chris Reeve would be more along the lines of the Mundi, which is a great modern traditional style thing. But then they did this. And so ultimately, I just don't get it. Maybe you love the design. Maybe this is all bias. Maybe I just don't get it. And I spent a bunch of time trying to get it. I still, unfortunately, don't. Maybe you love the design. Maybe you're a person who just loves Chris Reeve Knives and wants to collect everything they've done, so you'll end up with one of these that-a-way. Maybe you're just looking at it as like a curiosity. I wonder what Chris Reeve would do with a slip joint. Well, the answer is this. But I just don't get it. Maybe there is somebody out there for whom this is exactly what they want. This is exactly what the doctor ordered for him. And you know what? If it makes sense to you, let me know down in the comments what I'm feeling, because if I miss something, I'd like for people to at least read it down there. But at least for me, I don't get it. I really, really hope that Chris Reeve doesn't abandon the slip joint idea entirely, but that they maybe bring it to a knife that I think is a little bit better suited to the slip jointed. They bring it to something closer to what their areas of historic strength, etc. And so at least for me, yeah, it's a Chris Reeve. Yeah, it's done well, but at the end of the day, this just leaves me hoping that another release that's a little bit more towards their strengths as a brand is impending. So anyways, there you go. I hope this has been interesting to you, and have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.